Lo and behold, I'm back with another video because I thought, what the heck, why not? I mean, we're all in quarantine more or less because of the virus, so it's not all that much else to do. So as long as I'm able to do it, I will make new videos if I have something to say, and today I have a lot to say. Because I discovered something recently which ties directly into everything I've been teaching on this website, and it's extremely interesting. But before I start, I would like to, and I'm not the one who hands out trigger warnings usually, but with this subject, I would like to say that if you feel any discomfort or fear or anything like that when you listen to this, you should take a break probably and do something more uplifting, and it's up to you. But the first time when I discovered this, I felt certain things which made me take breaks, because this subject is something else. I mean, it might trigger people in a real way. And especially people who have weaknesses or woundings and these things. But anyway, we'll get to that. Now you have been warned, and I will continue because a little while ago, I let's start with this. In my family and also among people I grew up with, I've seen people, be diagnosed with what's called paranoid schizophrenia, and I've always wondered, what exactly is this? I mean, I know it's a mental disease, so-called, and but what? For me, there has to be a logic behind things. I don't just accept a label and that's it. I have to find out go to the very bottom of it and find out what is the real essence of this disease, because it affects like 1% of the population in the world. And I try to research it many times on Google, but the whole establishment, they just say it's a chemical imbalance in the brain, and the only thing that you can do is to give people medicine, for the rest of their lives. They have to be on medication because there is no cure. And that's basically the standpoint of view from the medical establishment and all doctors and psychiatrists and all that. There is no cure. You have to take very poisonous or not very healthy medicine for the rest of your life to basically suppress the voices that these people hear in their heads. And the voices and the patients are never taken seriously by the establishment, the doctors and the psychiatrists. They are just seen as nutcases and crazy people who hear hallucinations which are not real, and that's it. And they never really investigate further than that, until this one guy came around, and he is the one I will be talking about a little bit today. His name is Jerry Marzinsky. If I got the name correct, let me check now. Yeah, Jerry Marzinsky. And he worked most of his career, he worked on the front line of mental institutions and prisons, dealing directly with very severe cases of paranoid schizophrenia. And literally hundreds, maybe thousands of different people he has been in contact with who has this disease. And so he should know a lot about it, right? But what he did that nobody else did was to actually take the patients and these people seriously and actually listen to what they had to say about their own condition, which nobody else does. No doctors have thought about that for some reason. We'll get to that reason later. But he did that in a very brave way, because he had to go under the radar of the whole establishment, because nobody wanted him to do this. And he was even able to cure many cases completely. Like, people could stop taking medication and they stopped hearing voices, and they basically stopped being sick, mentally sick, and they could lead normal lives more or less again, because of what he discovered and methods he came up with. And I will link to his website. It's quite fresh, this material. He came about like last year, I think. Late last year he came to be interviewed on many YouTube channels, and he has published a book together with a woman who also suffered from this disease from early on, and she was able to cure herself with similar methods. So they have now collaborated and written a really interesting book, which I've ordered a book, but it takes a while because it's only available in hardcover or in physical. You can't get an ebook version. I asked them why. It was because the subject matter is too important. They can't have people copying from the book and misquoting or altering stuff and these things. They wanted the book to people to read, people who needed to read a book as it is, because in that book he discussed his different methods for curing this horrible mental state or disease. But anyway, he has a lot of free articles on his website, which gives you a lot of insights in what he has discovered, and he also have many very good interviews that you can watch published on YouTube and his website. And I will link to the website in the description below so you can check it out. And I really recommend that people buy his book, because this guy, in my view, is a hero. Because what he has done is not only brave; it's unheard of in the whole medical establishment, and what he brings to the world with this knowledge is very, very interesting. So let's get to it. So what this guy did after a while of working with these people, not only in mental wards and mental institutions, but also in big prisons. Like, that's really hardcore people to work with like that. People who can be dangerous for sure. But what he did was to actually ask them questions, and then he checked. He asked them, what do the voices tell you, and all. He just kept digging and digging, and taking them seriously. And then he gained their trust, and they would tell him all sorts of stuff that they wouldn't tell the doctors, because they know if they tell the doctors these things, they will be forced on hardcore medications, and maybe strapped up in a isolation cell or something. So they didn't trust the system, but he gained their trust, and they opened up. And what he learned was that every single patient who suffer from these voices, the schizophrenics, they all hear the same message from these voices. There's never a positive message. It's always extremely negative stuff that comes out of these voices who they hear. And some of the people think it's their own thoughts, most of them maybe. But some of them have realized it's not really their own thoughts, but most of them think so. But I can't even go into, he has a list of the most, I think 100 most common sentences that these voices repeat when they attack. And it's very destructive and negative stuff. I don't even want to repeat it because it's so horrible, but you can find a list with like 100 sentences on his website somewhere. And you can read if you want. I stopped after a few because, I just imagined having those kind of voices saying this to you, and maybe 100 or maybe many voices at the same time, or maybe one or two. Doesn't matter. It's still very nasty. But anyway, he discovered that, okay, why, if it really was just hallucinations, so-called, why is it not random, weird stuff? Was it always extremely negative? And they come like in a feeding frenzy in which they just pile on with more and more negativity until the person who suffers the attack is completely drained of energy. Like they will not stop until he is so drained of energy that he can't even move for maybe a day. Just have to lie in bed. And that happens every time they attack like that. It's like a feeding frenzy because they feed on people's negative emotions or energies. And he also discovered that almost exclusively, almost every single patient who suffered this had been through severe childhood traumas. That was a common denominator for all of them, and many of them also were into drug abuse and all sorts of stuff like that. And as he said, especially methamphetamine is the worst. That alone, if you abuse that drug alone, it can open you up to these voices to come, or these beings, which he refers to as archons, which is a common term in Gnostic religions for these beings. So I will use that term here. I will use archons when I talk about them. But basically, so he discovered that they are consistently extremely negative, and they drain people of their energies. And they also know stuff. I mean, they will tell. He talked to many meth addicts, and they told him that these voices will actually tell them which house to break into, because there no one is home, or those people are not armed, or there only lives, you know, an old lady or something. So they will give advice, things that the meth guy they cannot know. These voices will guide them into doing negative stuff. And they will even guide them so they don't get caught by the police. And they will even almost tell them where the most valuable stuff is. You know, that's how much these beings. So they cannot be, obviously, they cannot be the own person's mind or the own person's thoughts, because how would he know? He wouldn't know these things. So these beings are autonomous and independent of the person. And what's more is that he once actually they wanted to talk to him. I mean, he was treating a patient in prison, and the prisoner told him that, hey, the voices want to talk to you, because they didn't like what he was doing, obviously, because he was actually helping people. And he said, what? That was the first time it happened. So he said, what? They want to talk to me? And he said, the prisoner, the patient said yes. And then his voice sort of changed, and they talked through him, like through the patient's mouth. And they just said, you have no right to interfere with our way of life. That was the only thing they said, and it was quite shocking. I was shocked when I first heard it, and he was really shocked. I mean, imagine hearing that. So he was interfering with their way of life, because he was helping people. So he was, you know, the food source, their food source was taken away from them, and they didn't like it. And oftentimes when he was treating people, he would feel like a pressure around him, you know, and when I learned about all this, I realized that this clicks completely together with what I've been talking about on my website and in my videos. These beings, as I see them, the archons, they are the proverbial darkness in which the flame or the light of your consciousness is constantly surrounded by. So let's say you have two things. You have the light or the flame, the inner flame of your awareness, consciousness, and then you have darkness. And the strength of your flame, of your light, determines how far away the darkness is, right? So what's happened to these poor people who have been traumatized very strongly from birth or from childhood, you know, they have very little sense of self-worth, and their inner flame of awareness and consciousness is really weak, which means these archon beings are closing in, like really close, which is why they can actually hear these voices, because the archon beings are always surrounding you. I mean, just look at the scale of consciousness, because the most of the schizophrenics are really low. They're like below 100 on the scale, maybe below 50. And when they're under attack, they probably go down even more. Like, you know, some of them are even driven to suicide, which is the bottom of the scale. So it's what goes on in the bottom of the scale, these feeding frenzy attacks from these beings. And because the inner flame and light is so weak, they become bold enough to be close enough to be heard, and to sort of not take over the person. That's not really possible, but they become like the person's own thoughts, or that he aligns so with such a low frequency that these beings can become his thoughts, kind of, or they can insert the thoughts into his mind really, really easily, because they operate all the way up the scale. But I guess I would think there are different levels of archon beings. These beings who come close enough to just repeat these negative sentences all the time. They're the lowest level, they're the foot soldiers, and they're probably higher ups of these beings who are much more intelligent and have a much more of an overview of things. But anyway, the point is that the darkness doesn't go away, but your light increases as you increase your level of consciousness, as you get up the scale, which means you're pushing the limit where these beings can operate further and further away from you. So most people are high enough to not hear the voices, because you have to be in the bottom of the scale to really hear them like that. But they're still operating in the shadows, in the right around the borderline of your light, slash darkness. And that's where they can insert impulses and thoughts that are really negative suddenly in unguarded moments. They can do that, even in high level people, even in regular people, and even in people high up the scale. That can happen in unguarded moments. That can happen because as long as you keep aware and as high within yourself and about everything, then they cannot attack that easily. But they can always try, and if you take drugs or do alcohol and these things, they can also more easily get the openings for attack, because they will always try to drag you down, and in all sorts of ways, and they know every weakness. If you've done something in the past that you're ashamed of, for example, you need to forgive yourself, because these beings will lash onto that lack of forgiveness and that ashamedness that you have, and they will remind you of it all the time they can to feed off the negativity it generates. And that's especially true for people on a very low level. But anyway, so the scale of consciousness is basically up to a certain point. You will always be surrounded by these beings. If you reach enlightenment, at least in higher levels of enlightenment, I guess you have a compression breakthrough where you sort of blast away all of these beings, all of the darkness, and you reconnect with the higher mind completely and the universe. And then these beings it's very hard for them to be close, because your light is so strong. Because what this guy Jerry Marzinsky discovered, was that people who suffer from these voices, the schizophrenics, if they read a Bible verse, like an uplifting, doesn't have to be the Bible, but an uplifting, empowering spiritual thing, like a mantra or something that's very positive and high level of consciousness, piece of text basically, then if they did that when these voices were around, the voices would suddenly sound like they were screaming worms in a frying pan. So because what happens, I believe, in my view, is that when I read those kind of texts, they fan the inner flame of awareness just a little bit, but enough for it to expand enough to sort of kill off the first line of archon foot soldiers, you might say. So that it doesn't take more than that. And when he discovered this, he had a weapon. He could use. He made people feel less hopeless, because now they could sort of fight back. They were not just a victim. And that, combined with the fact that many of them taught or now understood that, hey, these voices are not my own mind, they're not my own thoughts. These voices are actually external or autonomous beings on the astral plane. When they realized that, it was a big help in itself, because then they didn't think they were crazy. They were just under attack from these beings. It was not their own mind they were fighting. And when they found out about the uplifting spiritual text that helped, then they had like a weapon they could use against attacks. So that was two very big important discoveries, and it also shows that that doesn't take more than that to actually increase a little bit your flame of awareness, your flame of your inner light, to burn off these beings like vampires in the sunlight. But so basically every increase in level of consciousness is pushing against these beings, or they will try to stop you. And my own experience is that, especially when you move from below level 200 on the scale and to above 200 for the first time, you will probably have a brush-in with these beings, because I had that. I didn't know. I thought it was my own mind at the time, but I realized no, it was not. It was them. Because they will basically go crazy trying to stop you from breaching that very important threshold. And they will attack you with as best they can. As you increase your light, you will hear voices maybe on and off attacking you, trying to stop you from whatever you're doing that is actually making you break through. And they can do that on different thresholds, but the higher you go on the scale, the more you will be dealing with more clever beings, I guess you could say, more Luciferian tactics, because on the lower end of the scale, they're very blunt and direct in their negativity. Like they just say extremely negative stuff, like you're worthless, you're a burden to everybody around you, and these kind of things, and you should just kill yourself. And they will also tell you to kill other people and do all these things, which is why you hear all these people on the news who does horrible stuff, and they always claim that they heard voices telling them to do it, and that's these beings. And so if you go higher, above 200, then you're not really in a satanic level anymore. You're in the demonic or satanic level, but you're starting to move up in a more Luciferian territory, because the Luciferian tactics are more clever and more cloaked in truth. Like they will use truth, or what seems to be truth to hook you into different traps and these things. So they cannot operate so directly, because your light is much stronger. So the lower level beings who just are bluntly negative and pretty stupid just repeat the same sentences. They are no longer attacking at that level. You get smarter adversaries as the higher you go. And there are cases of even enlightened people at lower levels of enlightenment, maybe 600-700s, who have fallen. There are many cases of that if you look into it. People who definitely were good, but suddenly something changed, and so they must have had some kind of weakness that was attacked by these beings, these clever Luciferians type of beings, and then they took a deal or something, like they were maybe promised, like, if you do this, you will get famous and rich or whatever. And instead they got compromised, and then they started to spiral downwards, and maybe they even went all the way down. It's possible. It's not likely, but it can happen even at higher levels, and especially if you haven't really dealt with deep-seated traumas from childhood that maybe still be there, even if you're really high level of consciousness. So you always have to be on guard against these beings, and you can look at any negative thought you have, even though, obviously negative thoughts are generated by woundings or negative beliefs that you have deep in your subconscious. But that's what these beings are feeding off of. I've seen them with my intuitive vision. I've seen them a couple of times in people. It's like a veil is being lifted a little bit, and I can see these beings sit there and just feed off of that person's wounds, kind of psychological wounds, which generates fear and negativity. So that begs the questions: are these beings negative, or how should we view them? Is it a good thing to view them as demons? Because Jerry Marzinsky seems to kind of lean in that direction, that he's viewing them as very evil beings. And it's completely understandable. From a very human, down-to-earth perspective, they will definitely act and look and seem like demons, very evil beings. But I don't necessarily think it's a good idea to look at them that way, because if you do, you're actually generating more fear in which you're serving them. So what's a better way to look at them, in my view, is just look at them the same as you look at insects. No, not insects. No, bacteria. Bacteria in nature. So, you know, if a dead animal lies in the forest, bacteria will break the body down and it goes back to earth. So that's how you can see it. These beings have a job in the bigger picture. They have a job to break down or consume negative energy, and then when they have consumed it, it can go back to source as a neutral energy again. Because the negativity cannot go back to source, because the source cannot be negative. It has to be neutral, kind of, or beyond negative, positive. So the way I see it, that these beings, they have a purpose, and that is also positive. They're not only, even though they look and their effect on human beings are very negative, they still serve a higher purpose, which is to break down the negativity, which ultimately the human being himself is responsible for generating, even though that seems very harsh. You know, everyone is ultimately responsible to clean up their own subconscious and our own minds. You know, even though that can be really, really hard. But so these beings are only attacking because you already have weaknesses and traumas. So they're basically also showing you where you have these problems or these weaknesses, which can serve you if you use it that way. But I mean, I'm not saying that's easy. I'm not saying that I would manage to do that myself. You know, if I suffered from this kind of horrific low-level, you know, schizophrenia and these kind of things, if you have that disease, as it's called, then, you know, I'm not saying it's easy to do that at all. But ultimately, you are responsible for it. So that is, you know, you have to see things from different perspectives. You can't only see, oh, these beings are demons, they're evil. We should, you know, what can we do? You know, that's the whole system here is put up like that. These beings have been in control of the planet for eons, for a very long time, and the people who actually worship these beings is the Illuminati, satanic elite, or Luciferian elite. And obviously, these beings will help the elite to create as much negativity as possible, because that helps the elite rule the planet, and it also helps gives food, a lot of food to the beings. So it's a symbiotic relationship between the negative beings, the archons, and the human cabal or Illuminati cabal. Which brings us to what is going on these days, because these days these beings, the archons, are being cleaned up on all sorts of levels by the higher level ETs, at the same time that the people who worship them, the Illuminati cabal, are also being rounded up. So it's a big simultaneous operation, which will culminate in a giant, a global compression breakthrough, which is what I think will happen in 2020. It's all things seems to point in that direction now. Many people are saying the same, channelers, and these people are saying that this will be a massive year of change and the start of something completely new. And I believe the breakthrough comes when we break into, the mass consciousness breaks into 540 and above, which I predicted to be happening this year. I made that graph you saw in my last video. I made it back in 2016. So I stipulated that in 2020 we would break into 540, which is unconditional love. And these beings cannot coexist in a mass consciousness that is of unconditional love, which will create a completely different environment. Because when these beings are out of the picture, imagine how much more easy it will be to grow, to climb the ladder of consciousness, when you don't have that kind of an adversary against you anymore. But it will also create a lot of confusion, probably, because it's like something is gone and everything is now completely different. So people who have no clue will need a lot of guidance in the coming times. But anyway, so the whole negative hierarchy that has existed on this planet will suddenly be turned upside down when this happens. Because these beings, the archons, have been the ones who have been holding the whole negative hierarchy in place. And they are also responsible for what you might call negative synchronicity, or downward spiraling in consciousness instead of upwards. Because upward spiraling is the natural way of the universe, or of things to evolve. But since these beings, the more negativity you do, the more these beings will feed off of you, the more they will help you to do more negativity. So you can actually downward spiral and like that. And this guy, Jerry Marzinsky, he obviously he couldn't tell his higher ups that what he was doing, because they would be furious. Like, he told the story when some of his prisoner patients, they actually got cured, and they were really happy with this, obviously with this therapist, that he was able to do this for them. But the warden of the prison was not happy. He was furious. He was really angry, and he called him in, and he said, "What are you doing? These people have to be on medication. They can't stop." But they were actually getting so well that they didn't need medication to keep the voices uh, away anymore. So he stopped giving them the medication. And the warden, didn't know what to do. But he talked to the prisoners, but they just said they wouldn't. He wanted them to sort of testify against this therapist, Jerry. But they refused. They just told him to shut up, that he was actually helping them. So they refused to testify against him. So he didn't lose his job, at least not the first time. But obviously, I mean, why is it like that? Why is the whole establishment, the medical, all the doctors, psychiatrists, why would I not listen to this guy and the amazing research he has done? And it's been like that all of history. Any kind of new invention that could be very beneficial has always met a lot, or basically unison resistance from the establishment. It's because of this negative hierarchy of the archons. Because every being, every person, is surrounded by the archons, even though they don't hear voices. They're still surrounded. They maybe a psychiatrist have a level of consciousness 250, 300, maybe probably less usually most of the time, if they're not open to listening to anything other than what they have been taught in school, which most of them are not. But the reason is that nobody wants to challenge the archons, because they have sort of fought tooth and nail to gain a place in the hierarchy. They have a certain amount of inner flame, inner awareness, inner light, after going through childhood and everything. They have this, and they don't. If they challenge the archons, they intuitively feel that could open Pandora's box, and they could suddenly go crazy or become depressed. So nobody really wants, because any increase in consciousness will push against the archons, right? So, and people intuitively don't want that, which is why many people believe that meditation and these things actually opens you up for demon attack, which is completely bullshit. It doesn't do that. But it opens you up for facing off against what maybe will be seen as demons, which is the negative beliefs and the negative beings called the archons. Because when you actually increase your levels, you will, at certain thresholds, come into direct contact with, which can be very scary. And for this reason, people are scared of any kind of change. Uh, so the whole establishment fights against uh, any positive change, like this would be. Obviously, if this research that Jerry Marzinsky has done became known all over, known worldwide, and it became practiced, a lot of people would be helped, which the archons obviously don't want, because that will deny them a lot of food sources. So that's why nobody wants to listen to him, and nobody wants to go against the archon hierarchy. But it will be very interesting to see what happens when all of these darkness beings are gone. Because it is hard to imagine now, because we have been swimming in this ocean of darkness since birth, and for many, many lifetimes before that. So we have become used to it. We don't really know, or maybe we have a vague remembrance of how it would be without it, but it definitely will be different. So we'll just, have to wait and see, and hopefully it's all going to happen this year, in the coming months ahead, or the end of the year, who knows. But anyway, I will keep making videos as long as I have time for it, and as long as I have something to say. I'm not going to make videos just to make videos, but if I have something good or interesting to talk about, then I will make something. So that was it. That was it for this time, and I encourage you to check out this guy's website in the link below and buy his book. Which I'm waiting for my book because I really want to read the full description of everything and how he dealt with it. How he healed people. It will be really interesting. It might not be needed. The information might not be relevant if all the archons are gone in the future anyway. Maybe it's not relevant in that sense, but it's still historically, it's still very interesting as a record of how things were before. But let's say you talk to your grandkids or kids or whatever, 20 years from now, and you tell them about a time when everything was very different and crazy, and so historically, it's still interesting knowledge to have, even if it's not necessarily relevant for the immediate future in that sense of that it will be needed for therapy. I mean, maybe it will, I don't know, but if all the dark archons are gone from the astral plane, then then I don't see why it will be needed, because they will be gone anyway. But still, I'm going to read the book, and if you feel interested in it, you should do the same.